We look at our relationships, for lack of. Where and how are we relational or not? Choice of vocation. We look at our pathologies, our complexes. We try to. So when we look at this eco-psychologically, we're trying to understand what is going on with us as an individual, and also what is going on with us as a culture. Examining our psychological ecosystem through an ecological lens opens us, allows us to probe for diversity, expands our sense of self-understanding. It also exposes us to our vulnerabilities, our fragilities, our inferiors. It unearths our otherness, hidden away and invisible. To better understand this idea of otherness, we need to then see where we lack diversity in our inner life. Is everybody with me? Where are we advocating a type of internal monoculture, an internal monopsychology, an internal monovision of self and world? Diversity is probably our most valuable but least appreciated resource in ecology and in psychology. Loss of diversity has its root cause in spoliation and destruction of the physical environment. This is toxic pollution, overpopulation, overharvesting, deforestation, overfishing. This pauperizing of the planet produces hotspots, areas of concentrated loss, loss of habitat, species loss, and this is species loss for the whole planet. The same despoliation and destruction of our psychological environment results in personal hotspots, or an impoverished self-image, a soulless soul, a lost soul, a rootless soul. An impoverished self-image sees all others as also impoverished, less than, inferior, exploitable, and like invasive species to be eradicated. The inner other becomes the endangered species. These psychological hotspots, then we compensate for, we deny, we try to transcend. We do maybe what Hillman calls the tender-hearted approach. You know that one, the tender-hearted approach, where you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, so you don't do anything. You end up making a mess out of everything. Those psychological hotspots are our psychological hotspots are places where we refuse to acknowledge. In mythology, we call it, we refuse to let the gods into that ecosystem. We refuse the gods into that ecosystem. Therefore, we project it outward. So, how might we cultivate diversity? Depth psychology would advocate cultivating soul, or archetypal psychology would advocate cultivating soul. Soul-making, as Hillman calls it. But what does that mean? What does that mean? The word cultivate is interesting. It means to break up, to loosen up. And I love that analogy, to loosen up, Dionysian, the loosener. You're loosening up the soil, you're breaking things up. To cultivate, to foster growth. To further, to encourage, as in to cultivate the mind, to cultivate culture, to cultivate soil. Using this image from ecology, to cultivate our soul is much like cultivating the soil. To cultivate the soil, we have to mix up the bugs. As those of you who know Jeanette Parie's work, she mixes up the bugs. We have to give them space and place to thrive and do their work in the soil, right? We have to mix it up. And a little bit of ecology around this. Soil consists of microbes and archaea. A-R-C-H-E-A. It's a Greek term. Get to that. Soil consists of microbes and archaea. Very simply, they're organisms that cannot be seen without a microscope. They are the invisibles in the environment. Microbes outnumber all other organisms in the soil, and And they include bacteria, fungi, algae, protozoa. Microbes navigate through the soil by swimming in water films and traveling in the spaces between the soil particles. They travel in the gaps. They are the engine for life above the soil. Are you following the image? Bacteria and fungi act as decomposers and recyclers in the soil. If you think of your compost pile or your garden. Protozoa are the predators, and they keep the population in check. Algae and other types of bacteria usually generate their energy from the sun, so they live above. But all these other microbes live underneath in the underworld of the soil. Now, back to this word arche. It shares the same root. I said before it was Greek. It shares the same root with the word archetype. So the arche in the soil serve as an image for archetypes in the soul. Can you follow me there? The arche in the soil, the bugs in the soil, are bugs in the soul. Our archetypes, too, can provide a decomposing action. Fermentation. Well, it was there. What we talked about earlier. Fermentation, wind, decomposing action. This is akin to Hillman's pathologizing, falling apart, when our world crumbles in front of us, breaks apart, when the soul falls apart. Our archetypes can too recycle psyche in a sense, seeing through old narratives, seeing through old patterns of behavior, seeing through old belief systems and changing our relationship to them is akin to recycling in the soul. Our archetypes can too be our predators. Or I should say that differently. Our archetypes too can be our predators. As many of our complexes that prey, destroy, and devour us. Or that we prey, destroy, and devour others. This is the ecology of the psyche. It's how we live. It's what lives in us and through us, and it can help us to live more consciously. The arche, as well as the archetypes, both live underground, underneath the soil, underneath the soul. They are the invisibles. These subterranean forces that give shape to nature and help to shape who we are. The bugs in the soil are like the bugs in our soul. They cultivate, they educate, they enrich them, they enliven. Cultivating our soul, or tending our soul, if you prefer that, is essentially allowing what is in the unconscious to become conscious, to allow what is unknown, as in the other, to become known, to have voice, to have presence. Not so easy to do. Because you are readying yourself for an individual death, a mythological death of old bugs, old stories that no longer serve the whole ecosystem. This too is a part of the cultivating process. There is always potential for constant renewal to take place in our psyche. In Rudyard Kipling's story, Just So, the elephant got its long trunk because the crocodile always tried to pull it into the river. And I don't see this story necessarily as one of, tooth and claw, or eye for eye and toe for toe, or whatever that is. I think it's more about things may be just so. There may be just enough suffering in the world and yet too much. But things may also be just so when we look at this cultivating process of the psyche. Not a carnage, as in the story of the alligator pulling on the elephant's trunk. Not a carnage, but animals in harmony, of limited conflicts and assimilation, dependency, compliance, and death. A collaboration of coming and going. processes in nature. However, in this collaboration of life, we need what Alan Watts calls a frank recognition of your dependence on beloved enemies, underlings, outgroups, and indeed upon all other forms of life whatever. I would actually advocate for a brute honesty in this work. A brutal honesty. Otherwise, she concludes, we're doomed to, and this is fabulous, this is so Alan Watts, we are doomed to schizoid, uncompromising, unscrupulous, bitter idealisms and gangsterism without humor or humaneness, or to a gooey philosophy of undifferentiated belonging. It's the word undifferentiated that's key. In an image for diversity, if plants are the context of our life, animals are, as Jung states, not planted and rooted, but roaming. Not cyclic only in our rhythms, but multiphasic. Not only a seed blown, but a new volition and sensitivity. New level of trust in the organism we are. New level of trust in the organism we are. We can use these images, I think, to help us develop a little trust when we approach the unconscious, be it of the individual or the culture. One of the issues that we've discussed at this conference have been cultural complexes. Those complexes lived out in group life that are internalized in the psyche of the individual. To cultivate diversity, to begin to see our otherness or individual complexes, as critical to the formation of our inner humus. Our inner humus, that rich, fertile soil that's produced in a composting process. I think this can aid us further in approaching the larger looming cultural complexes. Still, it's very difficult to tease out the individual complexes from what's culture. The other in our psyches, our wild animals, our pathologies, our complexes, our neighbors, our invisibles are part of our inner landscape. Everything out there has its resonance in us and helps to create our ideas of who we are. Human well-being then is linked to otherness, as many of you have talked about this weekend. If we are in relationship with these archetypal images and forces and not stuck in them, and not negatively identified with them, then these ecological images and metaphors can potentially help us to differentiate, separate out from that which we are identified with. The very, serious conversation that we've been having this weekend, I think, speaks to this idea toward our cultural complexes. And we each have them. Mexico has it as well as the United States have it. Every culture has a cultural complex. How could it not? But to unroot that and to unearth that takes conferences like this, encourage the people like you that attend these conferences and participate to do that work. So the cultural complexes are different, yet we share very many of the similarities, especially between Mexico and the United States. So how do we tease out these individual and cultural traumas so that we can work them consciously? Ecopsychology would offer an avenue for exploration. It's just one way of looking at these things, one way of entry. But we still also have to deal with the fear of change that this exploration could potentially provide or offer or create. To engage plurality and diversity, that age-old misonism of the psyche, as you called it, must die. That fear of change has got to go. Diversity exemplifies the many-sidedness of nature and of human nature. Allowing the invisibles to be visible is akin to living mythically, to living symbolically, as Jung would say. It is living ecologically.